Um, so the title of my talk today is No Shit Sherlock, and this is a series of things that I'm going to talk about that seem obvious to me now that when we first started the company were not obvious at all. So there's 5 slides, I have 5 minutes, so we'll see if I can get through these in a minute a slide. So the first thing, and honestly this is the most important thing we've ever done, and if I was ever going to go do another company, I would actually start with this before I called my first customer, before I thought about what product I even wanted to build, what market I wanted to go into. So we call these core values. We put these in place about 4 years ago. We had basically grown from 3 people in a basement to about 70 people. We had always thought culture was important, but we never really took the time to actually write down what it was for us. And it was kind of, you could start to see this high school thing happening where there was little cliques of culture starting to form as we grew. So we took some time. We had about a 2-day session with a consultant. They left with 18 pages of notes, and I remember thinking it was the biggest waste of time ever. And they came back with 4 phrases that basically nailed our culture. And the way we've come to understand them, and I'll go through this a lot quicker than I can do justice to it, but the stuff in the middle here, so customer first, complacency is not an option, passion for success, value individuals, those are things that define the people who work for us. And then what we find is if we're really deliberate about filling the company up with those types of people, it's really easy to empower them. And the rest of the stuff I'm going to go through is kind of where this journey that started with core values and the conclusion was we should go build an empowered culture, kind of where that's led us. So first thing that's obvious, this is this idea that you should trust your employees. And this sounds like an obvious thing, but if you actually look at HR practice, IT practice, most of those disciplines are actually built on the premise that you shouldn't trust your employees. And so things like vacation policy, you can only take 3 vacation weeks a year. Our philosophy was, well, why don't we just trust someone's going to take the amount of vacation that they want? So, you see unlimited vacation in a press release, but really it's born from this idea of trust. Things like setting up network credentials. Let's just trust people aren't going to hack us from internal, makes it way easier. Things like job titles, things like setting your salary. We keep taking this further and further, and I've been shocked at how much you can do if you just trust people. It gets rid of so much overhead in your company, and 99 times out of 100, people do the right thing. So that was one big one. Another big moment for us, then again in hindsight, it's pretty obvious. This is a process you guys have probably heard of, Net Promoter Score. It's often used for customers. We use it for employees. So every 6 months, we ask one question. How likely would you be to recommend Miovision to one of your peers on a scale of 1 to 10? And then we ask you one text question that says, what can we do to maintain or improve your score? We've grown this. When we first measured it, we scored a 20, which isn't great. Our last measurement was 59, which is a lot better, but we still have some room to go. But the insight in here was, who would have thought that if you just ask people what we should do to make the company better, and then you do those things, and you do that over and over again, people will like the company better. This is another one we had. So we don't really have org chart in the traditional sense at Miovision. We define roles based on the intersection of passion, skill, and need. And what I mean by that is a project that we have is derived from some goal we create. So that's a business need. And in that project team, we'll define a bunch of roles. We don't necessarily go out and say, hey, Johnny, you got to be on this project team. We just say, here are all the roles that are available. Skills become sort of a negotiation. I can go to tell my developers, hey, I'm great at programming. They might say, nice try. No, you're not. So the skill becomes a conversation between the employee and the company. And then passion is 100% owned by the employee. So I can't tell any of my staff what they're passionate about. They get to decide. And then once we have these 3 things, people sort of go and fill in the roles we've defined based on their skills and their passions. And the org structure becomes sort of emergent from all of that. In a minute, hard to get into more detail, but it's worked really well for us to maintain engagement. I don't think we've had any voluntary turnover in about 18 months. And number 5, this is the slide I was trying to recover from the infamous USB key. But we've also applied this concept to management. And I said we don't really have org chart at Miovision. One of the things that we figured out when we started studying managers was there's 3 things that a traditional manager is asked to do: strategy, um, people and what we call GSD, or get shit done. So basically execution, people's emotions, and strategy. And what I found was that all the managers that I studied were like naturally good at one of them, right? They were great with people, or they were great with strategy, or they were just maniacal about getting stuff done. And they had learned how to be passable at another one, right? So someone came in and said, hey, I had a bad week, and they'd be like, oh yeah, tell me about it. And then they were terrible at the third one. And so what we did was we actually created essentially 3 different management teams inside the company. So 3 different management hierarchies, each focused on one of those three things. And we let managers flow to the one that they were naturally passionate about and naturally good at. And it completely transformed our management dynamic, whereas before our hierarchy was the lowest common denominator as you'd go through the structure, and the people actually doing the work were getting sort of the lowest common denominator through that, to now where essentially everyone has 3 managers, one for strategy, one that manages their day-to-day emotional needs, and one that manages their workflow. So those were some things that were obvious to us, or weren't obvious to us, but now in hindsight are. We've applied, and it's helped to kind of build the business that we're about 120 people now. It's helped us to build the business that we've built today. So thank you. Yeah, about that. I will call myself a startup until they tell me I can't. See, I mean, part of what we've done with this, and I mean, it's hard in 5 minutes to get into all the details, but essentially what we've created here is we have a whole bunch of little startups that run inside the company, and we just figured out how to kind of get that to scale. But each of the teams still largely runs like a startup. Yep. How's it going? So I have 2 talks. One's called No Shit Sherlock, and the other one's about failure. So yeah, I mean, you learn stuff all the time. Like we've learned everything from, talking to your customers. People have talked about that a lot. We've not done that and paid the price. We've not had core values and let the culture run away on us. Even things like, as you get bigger, turning some of your marketing effort internally to make sure that you're actually communicating to your employees. At 120 people, I like to think I still know everybody's name, but it's it's hard for them to know what's happening inside your brain. So you start to build process around that. Yeah, I mean, I could go on for don't run out of money. Go on for forever about failures. Yep. Yeah, it was more just maybe study them is the wrong way to put it. It was more just that over the sort of years I've been doing this, you start to pick up on sort of themes in terms of how managers operate. And so, I mean, I guess, I don't know if they necessarily knew they were being studied, but it's just kind of like every day interacting with these people. I always found that on those 3 dimensions, I always had to be sort of pushing them to do one of them, and they ultimately didn't want to. And then so finally the realization was like, why do I spend all my time trying to get them to do something they don't want to do? Why don't I just build the org structure in a way that they don't have to do that anymore? So, not that I'll admit to. Yeah. Yeah, so really, I guess we have no managers in the traditional sense. We think of management and those 3 different types of managers as almost like no different than any other function, right? Like whether it's HR or finance or engineering or sales, managers is just another function. So honestly, the biggest challenge with what we do is figuring out who makes decisions when there's conflict between, so you might have two different leaders in the company that have different views. How do you break those ties? So we spend a lot of time trying to figure out precedent around how that all works. But yeah, it took time to kind of develop the system, and I'd be lying if I said it wasn't somewhat chaotic at the beginning. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite expressions is good artists create and great artists steal. So, I mean, I think a lot of this was homegrown in the sense of like how we synthesized it all, but we took concepts from Agile, from Holacracy, from traditional hierarchical management, from Netflix, from Google. I mean, we'd steal from anybody, but ultimately we just sort of we always had those core values as like a guiding principle when we were trying to construct it to make sure we're still being true to who we were. Okay, thanks.